and some points of emphasis. I think I want to say that the issue of the delegated legislation is critical, and maybe the lawyers in the House can all to the Attorney General. His opinion or advice is that normally delegated legislation would lapse after a 10-year period. Yes. And it would require a review and further consultations. So the window that can be there is, I think, a slight extension to be able to allow the relevant departments to take into account current circumstances and liaise with Parliament so that that can be dealt with in a proper way. And this is one of the reasons we are here, so that we can start engaging more fairly and legally on some of these issues. I think I will take up the issue of the Ministry of Education with the Cabinet Secretary for Education, because you raise a very fundamental point. Let me say that I'll look at it, talk to him, and we can respond to you on that one. The issue of equity from Honorable Bissau. It is through collaboration and proper interrogation of bills or pieces of legislation or even policies that we can decipher whether there is a fair proportion of the principle of equity reflected there. And I do agree with you, and that is why I brought it here, that can we just revisit those three principles: growth, equity, and sustainability. We need to ask ourselves as Parliament, the bills that we have passed and the ones that we intend to pass, do we reflect equity? Do those bills reflect the balance and the proper accommodation of all parts of the country? Or have we been pushing bills that are detrimental to some other parts or to some segments of our society? And this is why I'm really emphasizing that let us look for that principle of equity in our legislation. I want to assure Honorable Shakil Shabir that if the state tried to capture Parliament, it would be a lost cause. We should not go there. We should not even think about it. Parliament must be independent. And this morning, the comments that came from the speakers, it's very clear that they're very strong men and women who will not entertain anything of that nature. So, so we shall not even attempt to walk in that direction. Let me add that we look forward to cooperating meaningfully where we have that piece of legislation, where we need something urgent. For instance, if I asked you today, that piece of legislation you're putting on the table, is it in a position to increase an extra shilling in the pocket of a Kenyan? Or is it just a piece of legislation that is going to grind so many institutions to a halt? That should be the guiding principle. And I also agree with Nikal that we need to take our legislative processes even more seriously, and those in the executive, we need to be clearer on what kind of policies we are actually putting on the table. The reality is that we have seen a lot of legislation that is not backed by policy, emanating both from the executive at times and also even within Parliament. We are all guilty on this one, that sometimes we are pushing through a piece of legislation and we've not thought through the policy that we want to try and achieve. So I think this is something that we can all work together and be able to deal with. Mr. Nikal, Honorable, I think the fact that we will be able to get government working more cohesively on cross-cutting issues, I think is very important. Principal secretaries are usually the pivot point when it comes to policy formulation and even the implementation as ministries. And a forum or a platform that allows proper integration on those issues and canvassing and conversations would be very, very helpful. For the in the committee that we are setting up, because the structure we are setting up is such that we can work not in silos but with others, and we'll work very closely with the Office of the Attorney General. The Office of the Attorney General is our principal drafter. They are the key, at the end of the day, any piece of legislation will pass through their hands. What we want to try and do is to fill a gap that relates more to the policy formulation and the internal consultations that needs to be undertaken before the Office of Attorney General does its final drafting. That is, it may appear thin, but that is an area that we've noticed that it becomes quite a challenge. Sometimes if you just push a bill to the Attorney General and you have not thought through it, it becomes a problem. Yeah.
Thank you, Prime. I think, just for emphasis, the point of Robert Mbui, before we take another round, just 1 minute. We have a lot of regulations out there drafted by people in parastatals, even in cooperative societies, in ministries, and in other government agencies. The exclusive authority to make law under our Constitution is vested in Parliament. At the national level, National Assembly and Senate, and the county assemblies. Courts always make laws through judicial pronouncements that become precedents that we follow. I think Robert Mbui was also driving towards the point that, are you now able as a new office to communicate to all government agencies, including ministries, that under no circumstances should they sit and make regulations and impose them on wananchi, some with even financial obligations, without taking them to Parliament? For Parliament to look at, we have committees of delegated legislation that will then formulate them into law. I think, Robert, that is one of the points you're driving. Is that correct? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are well guided.
Yes.
Yeah. Madam is taking note.
Okay. So now we can take another 4. Looks like the Prime Cabinet will stay here for a little longer than we thought. I'll take the gentleman at the end. Who is that, Mheshimiwa? Kwenya. I'll take Bensuda. I'll take Rindikiri. And I'll take Mama Nairobi, and I'll take Raso. Those are 5. We'll do another round after that. And the next round will be the last. Okay, start from where we started. 1 question or 1 comment.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question goes to the Prime Cabinet Secretary, and is on an issue that you've just raised on the issue of regulations. I understand that Treasury is preparing some amendment to the Constitution, or to the Act on privatization, so that then parastatals, when the government is intending to sell its stake in government-owned parastatals, that then Parliament is going to be overpassed or bypassed, and there's a proposal to that effect that we change the law, and of course that is going to remove our oversight task that we have been tasked by the Constitution. So I would want to hear your comment on the same, because I think it will be in bad taste to bypass Parliament when the government is intending to do intending to sell its stake to the public.
Who was the next? Bensouda?
For the presentation, I would like to ask from the monitoring perspective. I'm glad that you've mentioned that in your cabinet secretary you're going to ensure that monitoring unit is set. Number one, what are the strategic objective approaches that you are going to use or employ to ensure that the issues which are touching on policy do not have stalemate, because you are the link between the Parliament and executive? And should they arise, what feedback mechanisms are you going to employ to ensure that they are amicably realized in a structured manner? Number two is on gas. We are talking of raising the economic situations, which we said increasing of tax is not the only way. We can also go privatization. Yes, we know there are many industries in this country which have fallen. I would like to ask, what is the role of the government in ensuring that all the industries that are to be initiated, those that are existing and collapse, are not going to be fully privatized, and how is that going to be used to benefit the economic status of this country and curb on the wage bill? Thank you.
Who was next? Rindikiri.
Thank you. Our Cabinet Secretary, I lays on an issue that we all have suffered under. There are so many commissions in this country. There are Commission on Salary Remuneration Commission, there are Commission on Living Allocation, TSC, Commission on Cohesion. These are all commissions that are touching to the welfare either of the employees of this country or even the teachers of this country. Mr. Prime Cabinet Secretary, in your speech you did not mention your coordination with these commissions. Which office will they be coordinated from? Because as it is right now, they are doing a lot of activities out there, independent of Parliament, and the questions are left to us as members of Parliament to answer. For example, the TSC, which is operating on funny platform right now, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission. We need to know how your office is going to coordinate with all these institutions such that they are responsible and they are able to deliver, particularly when it touches to Parliament. The other specific commission, Commission on Living Allocation, which it plays a very greater role in commission allocation and specifically determining which region need to benefit from arid and semi-arid land programs. We have never known how they operate. We hear some regions have been defined, others are not defined, and we get to know this when they have already implemented their programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Pasaris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Cabinet Secretary, when I was listening to you, I want to make a comment on a legislation that I found. In 2014, the Parliament passed a law, they passed a bill on the psychology and counseling. And when we came to COVID and we realized that mental health was a big issue, and I came to find out about this bill through some counselors out there in Nairobi, that there is this bill and it has never been implemented, and if it could be implemented right now, it could really help us deal with mental health. So I actually I got a copy of the bill, I wrote to the Ministry of Health, and I said, look, there's this bill, can you implement it? And they said, no, we do not have a budget. So later on, towards the end, the CS then, Mutahi appointed a board. But for me, I feel that if you want to have growth, equity and sustainability, we have to take a bill not just to policy, but also to budgeting for it, so you can actually be able to implement it. Because can you imagine how many Kenyans are suffering right now with mental health challenges, and we've not put resources into the Psychology and Counselors Act, and it took us more than 5 years to even think about how can we implement that act. There's so many things that happen in that area where we also put investments, like we had a hospital that had stalled for over 30 years, and this was when I went to the then budget committee chair, Ichungwa, and I said, look, there's this hospital, can you find me at least 500 million to complete it in Nairobi that has been stalled for over 30 years, even before Mama Lucy it was started. And then he found the resources, and eventually it was built. But the Ministry of Health did not know about it. Nairobi County did not know about it. It was a project of the Public Works then. So I feel that your role, your office, if it's going to look at legislation, it has to go beyond, so that we can also find the laws that exist, because there's some really good laws that have been passed, but they're just sitting. They've not been implemented. There's no budget. So I wonder whether your office will also play a role in making sure that that happens.
Thank you. Russell?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Prime Cabinet Secretary, my question is about public participation. Every time the law is passed, it becomes an act, then it is being challenged in court. The question I want to put to you, because you will be majorly organizing the heart of government in terms of crafting these laws, the shape and form that public participation is likely to take. Secondly is, in the tail end of all parliaments, bills are rushed, they become law. Then the next parliament, when it comes to being, it challenges those laws, and people on the street say those bad laws were passed by parliament. How are we going to avoid to pass laws at the dead end of the night only to be challenged in court? Finally is the omnibus bill. I think for the old members, what government attempts to do, if you want to pass bad laws, you snake things in the omnibus. How are you going to assure us that actually, instead of omnibus, we can actually even pass laws or bills that are 2 or 3 liners that address a single issue? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Prime. You can now go.
Thank you. I just want to emphasize the first aspect of Kwenya, that what the Treasury has done, they are putting out the bill for public participation, and it cannot become law until Parliament has dealt with it. So whatever Parliament, and therefore Parliament will have the last word on that piece of legislation. And I hope the concerns that you have can then be taken care of. The same issue also comes to ensue the question on privatization. That perhaps is a topic that I would request that Parliament maybe give it a special day sometime, because there's usually the debate around privatization as to what is a strategic enterprise, what is not a strategic enterprise, and in the process we have categorized these that way, but some of them are just loss-making entities, and we are sustaining people there, just paying salaries, and at the end of the day they are not doing anything. So what I am calling upon is that as Parliament looks at this, and this is a very serious area, for your information, we have over 300 state corporations. Over 300. Some of them knows where they are. All right? But legally they are there. People are earning from those entities. Taxpayers, yourself and others are sustaining them. So we need to have a clear situation under privatization conversation, a detailed one, on what needs to be privatized and what needs to be held on by the government. Secondly, economies change. And as economies change and they become dynamic, what was perceived as strategic turns out not to be strategic in a general sense. And I'll give an example. Telecoms, the whole issue of communication. The first thing that came in was the fax machine. And I remember being a very young person in government, the people who monitor what people do in government offices and elsewhere were even trying to track which office has a fax machine and which one has not. Because they used to say, siri za serikali zinatokea kwa fax machine. Then later the question was, can you privatize telecommunications? And the argument was that this is strategic, it must be in the hands of the government and nobody else. But today, you and I know that communications is strategic, but it is being driven by the private sector. All right? So we have outgrown what was the perception then. And there are so many other examples one can give in that field. So we need to have an engagement where we can then handle this question in more detail. For instance, KPLC is a monopoly, a distribution monopoly. But before, KPLC used to be both a generation and distribution. You can have KPLC now generating. You also have people who are doing solar power generation. Others are doing wind. Okay, but the monopoly of distribution is still in the hands of KPLC. And you people have traveled, you have gone to school elsewhere, you have seen what is happening globally. Even distribution of power, whether you're in the US or the UK, it is not a monopoly anymore. It is in the hands of other players. So it is up to Parliament to say, is this law serving us anymore or is it, and what do we do? And these are the tough questions that we will all have to deal with. I hope I have assisted a little bit in that area, but it's too complex to finish in one sitting. I would really encourage, Mr. Speaker, at some stage, a thorough discussion on privatization would be very, very important for Parliament, because at the end of the day, it cannot take place without Parliament giving its support. Mr. Honorable Rindikiri, I just want to say that I'm being very cautious because those are constitutional commissions. Some of them are constitutional commissions and they're independent, and I don't want to try and purport to legislate for some of them. They have to originate their concerns in a manner that is separate from this process. I'm sure even Justice Ibrahim will help us on this one when he's making a conversation. So I didn't want to tread there. But in terms of liaison, constitutional commissions and the liaison with the executive, okay, when certain things processed, that has been vested with the Deputy President. Okay, so that is why I'm not touching that particular issue. Mheshimiwa Pasaris, I could not agree with you more. This is why I was saying that there are a lot of pieces of legislation that will require tracking so that they can be actualized. We also have to make become much more thorough in seeing whether they are funded or whether they are not funded. For instance, one of the questions that always comes up at the cabinet level is that when you submit a cabinet memo or you want something approved, you have to state whether there are financial implications or not. If there are financial implications, either to a bill or to a particular program, then you must explain how you intend to fund that particular program. So I think it's absolutely essential that what you are saying, can we back our legislation, and if Parliament can also be very clear and interrogate the issue of financing, and that brings in the third aspect of my GES, sustainability. Whatever we are putting on the table, is it sustainable financially? Is it sustainable through the budget? Or what are we putting on the table? I also want to touch on Honorable Rosso's message. Actually, we need help. We need help because